Assembly website. All electronic devices, particularly mobile phones, should be switched to silent. And for the purposes of the recording and the transcript, I'd be grateful if everyone who speaks could ensure that you state your name and role. So if we can begin with introductions. I'm Deputy Helen Miles, Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Jonathan Renniff, Member of the panel.
David Johnson, Constable St Mary, panel member.
Deputy Alex Curtis, Member of the panel.
Deputy Max Andrews, a member of the panel.
Elaine Miller, Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Richard Bell, Treasurer of the States.
Richard Summerskill, Controller of Revenue.
Cora O'Brien, Deputy Controller of Revenue.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to draw attention to the fact that we've got 2 hours scheduled for this hearing, so we're aiming to finish by 4. And I understand that Deputy Gorse, the Assistant Minister for Treasury and Resources, will be dialed in at about 3 o'clock, I believe.
I think he's going to dial in later. Yes, he's in London today, I think.
Yes, I think he was unable to attend in person. Usual format, we've got a number of questions. We've given you the topic areas beforehand, and we'll be splitting between the 5 of us to do that. But I think just before we start, are there any updates coming out of Treasury regarding the responsibilities of the Minister? Has anything changed? Is there anything new that we need to know about?
Not that I can think of specifically, no.
Not that you can think of? Okay, no new financial recovery programme starting or anything like that? Nothing that you know about? Fab.
Well, nothing, it's not just what's in our business plan. We've got the priorities in the business plan, and we'll probably touch on it later. The team are working on a sort of a project, a general project in terms of long-term financial planning, but there's nothing specific.
Specific, okay.
Nothing out that we didn't already have on our radar.
Nothing new. Thank you. First questions, I'm going to go to Alex, please.
And thank you, Minister. We're going to briefly ask some questions about P88 2024, which for those listening is a proposition to change, in brief, the risk profile on pre-lets and pre-sales for States of Jersey Development Company developments. And Minister, as the Minister with oversight of States of Jersey Development Company, what discussions have you been involved in with regards to the proposed changes that are being sought in P88?
I've had discussions with SOJDC at the regular meetings. I have quarterly meetings, or aim to have quarterly meetings with all of them. So we have discussed it. We discussed the rationale and the reasoning. So I've discussed it at that level. Supported it. I support it. I think it makes sense. It's also been to the Regeneration Steering Group, who have also supported it, and the Council of Ministers. So yes, it has been very well discussed.
It's been well discussed. And what impacts have you assessed that the changes proposed in P88 will have in the wider context of any State of Jersey Development Company developments?
Well, these policies are always open to amendment, but at the moment this one will be with a view specifically to South Hill, and it's really addressing that. Well, it will become most relevant South Hill, which is I think their next residential development, and it's really recognising that the pre-sale and pre-let criteria that they've already had may not cause delay. If you look at College Gardens, took 15 months to get to the relevant level of pre-let. Now means everybody's kicking their heels while that happens. It's not. I don't think it's I don't think it's remotely satisfactory for purchasers to be. If you do a pre-sale, if you enter into a contract at the start of that 15-month period, to be a year later and nothing's happening. I think that's a good outcome for the buyers. And there's a risk of financial change when you're in a high interest rate environment. So I think it will enable them to build more quickly, which is what we all want. We all want more homes being built.
At its core, the model, as the panel understands currently, for approving the commencement of development is obviously for the board to be happy to proceed, finally for Treasury to be happy, ultimately any lenders to be happy with the terms, and then to meet the conditions that were set out in P73 2010, which is a sufficient level of pre-sales or pre-lets. And the change being proposed removes that, and we understand means that it will be down to the board and the lenders to say what they're comfortable with regards to risk?
It applies a different test, yes, and I think it's putting it on a more commercial footing. I'm saying I don't have that show on that bit of paper. It puts it on a more commercial footing, which says, rather than SOJDC doing something that the states have decided, which worked in 2010, but may not work in 2025, it is looking at it on a commercial basis, and if the lender is satisfied, then why should we not be satisfied almost? And it helps, it avoids delay. If they're having to wait a year, 18 months to reach pre-sale levels, the right levels, it's enabling business to go on and mitigates risk of prices going up while that pre-sale period is ongoing.
My recollection is that when that was put in place, it was because of fears that investments by SOJDC could, if they went wrong, could cause problems for the states as the owner of last resort, that you could end up with liabilities on the taxpayer. And therefore, it is a very demanding set of criteria that are put in place before development is allowed to go ahead. This effectively is a relaxation. Are you at all concerned about the effects that might have on the risk that the taxpayer is taking on board?
Well, we still need to look at what the development is as a whole, what they will be borrowing, what the terms are for the borrowing, and then for the build. I mean, if you're borrowing, having something sat for a long time, if you may be paying fees just for having the facility available, and if you're paying fees to not draw down a facility, there could be also. I don't think there will be a change in risk, but do we want houses built? Do we want houses built quickly for people and apartments? That's what the public really want.
You have assessed the risk. That's what I'm trying to get at. Have you assessed the risk that the taxpayer is taking on? You've accepted that it is a different risk profile. Have you assessed that risk?
Risk profile. Yeah, well, it's a risk, and yes, it is a different. It will be a different level of risk, but I think it's appropriate. I don't think it's. You know, they are not going to borrow a massive sum of money and then suddenly find they've got a huge debt with nothing to sell against it. You know, the way property development debt works, I'm sure there will be drawdown periods, and it'll be sold. If they are borrowing to build, they will have an asset that then can be sold to pay the loan or let to pay the loan.
That's an interesting kind of view on it, which is about who's a risk and who's going to lose out, because what we understand from P88 is that SOJDC are looking to use third-party bank finance to 2/3 of the total development value. But that means that the bank's appetite might be, well, the value of this estate could fall by 1/3, and I can reclaim a set of securities, which is the asset, and be left in a fine position. And I guess what we're trying to ask, and I think Deputy Reniff was touching on, is this is inherently a different approach to development risk, and there is a risk associated both on the risk that a bank may or may not have in saying, well, we are securing our finances against an asset, but also the board having decisions. And it's just for us to really understand the process that proposing these changes has gone through, from the board through to the RSG and to Comment, and who's intervened. So I don't know if there's any more you can share in who brought this up, who felt this was the right move to make, and what kind of conversations.
It would have come from SOJDC. They would have instigated it. They borrow, I believe they borrow for all their developments. You know, we do not give them money. And I think there is always ultimately a risk for government because it's a government entity. So regardless of what happens, any time a government-owned entity borrows, there is they may get better terms because they're a government entity, because people know they will assume it's relatively low risk. It's lower risk than lending to an entirely independent developer.
So touching back on actually one part you mentioned, which is the focus was actually immediately South Hill and the change. Was any consideration given to limiting the scope in P88 to say that the lending and the requirements to commence development are for South Hill only? Because as we understand it, this change here will change for all future SOJDC developments, yet it seems like it's targeting a specific one. Was any consideration given?
I don't think it's, well, maybe that's wrong. My understanding is it will become apparent first with South Hill, where they've changed the name of it now, it's now been called something else. But it will become effective with South Hill first. But I do think in terms of outcomes, in terms of speed of development, the outcome for the buyers who are not then sitting waiting years for their property, I think that balances out against commercial lending risks.
In the looking to South Hill then and thinking about that, have you already given any consideration to the viability of that scheme under the current conditions, and is that at all where these conversations led to, not just for the delay in construction, but obviously being shovel ready soon?
I think work is ongoing on South Hill, and I think SOGC have identified that it took 15 months to hit the pre-sale targets for College Gardens, and that was in a different time with interest rates. Given where we are now, that is not a helpful place to be in terms of risk, the risk of property going up. Now, if they do pre-sales, now either they don't reach or property has gone up, they would then have to unwind all those contracts and give people the money back. So I haven't seen the plans for South Hill. I'm not a property development expert. That's what we pay them to do, is to come up with schemes that get through planning that people want.
So, might
Do
be
you want to add
worthwhile adding
anything?
that as and when these individual projects are brought forward, once we get to the point where they are reasonably assured of the price of construction, procurement, the case comes back to, having gone through the board, comes back to the Treasury, and we commission our own review of the individual projects, and that will push out whether that project is particularly risky, whether aspects of risk that we might want to follow up with the board are. Back to an earlier question, I suppose, there's been long held view that the particular measures have been partly poorly designed in the case of the office accommodation, in that it assigned no value to units that weren't pre-let but clearly had a value. I guess what we've seen is, not necessarily just specifically at South Hill, is a key determinant in how quickly these housing units in particular come on market. So if it's weighing one risk against another, or I'd probably argue it is an issue arising from the overly risk-averse position of the existing policy, is that the risk of the targets we set for more units of housing coming on line has risen as a result of the pre-let, or is compounded by the existing high pre-let levels over and above that which you'd expect in a commercial transaction.
Yeah, that's just, sorry, Richard has picked on a point that I was meaning to come to, which is you'd said earlier on, you were kind of interpreting P88 as meaning that the decisions are now entirely for the board, and that is not the case, that even their lending, any lending they do has still got to come back to us for approval. So this isn't just giving the board carte blanche to go and do what they want, because we still, through the shareholder relationship and the MOUs, they have to come to us about any borrowing. So there is still that extra, and as Richard said, the third-party assurance reports, there is still that extra level.
I've got probably one more question on this, but which I think touches on where the Treasurer was heading, which is about governance, and I think the panel would just like a quick rundown of that. But before we go there, it was that tension you're describing between the weight for pre-lets and the impact on construction costs. But by changing this model, we are seeing an interesting housing market where there's a lot of units sitting around for an awfully long time. Do you see any risk or perceive any risk that approving a development with perhaps far less certainty that the units are desirable to the market to purchase is a risk? In essence, if you start building when you only know 10% of them are allocated, we could sit around like some private developers are with a large book of properties. And how do you assess that risk? Because you mentioned almost a political comment, we want more housing.
Yeah.
But the market shows there's an awful lot of it.
But I think you also have to remember that if you're a private sector developer, I don't know, I don't believe you've got the same rules about affordability. So states of Jersey have specific rules that they have to address about affordability, about meeting first-time buyers and right-sizers. So if we assume there is a market for right-sizing, which we're led to believe there is, who want to buy these type of flats.
Not at Snow Hill.
Well, it may be, or first-time buyers, and SOGDC have worked very hard in terms of structuring products and means of helping people onto the housing ladder. So I think because they will not be charging, they have different commercial imperatives. I mean, yes, they have to get the money in to pay off the debt, but they do not necessarily have, they are not operating the same as a private sector.
Okay, that's helpful. And so
And again, because the private sector developers don't necessarily have any pre-sale, they could just build a development of houses and worry about it when they're built, rather than states of Jersey having to get some element of pre-sales or pre-lets.
yeah, I think many of them are worrying now, and I think that's what we're trying to understand, the risk profile as to will we, as an assembly, be worrying in the future?
I think we're still a long way off, and I think if we thought that we were going to build a development that would sit there redundant, I mean, they could be let, Andim could take them over, there are all sorts of things that could happen. Okay. You could ask Andim to, for example, that's just plucking something out of the air, SOGDC can let them out. So I think if we thought we were going to sit with a complete white elephant, then we would have discussions about.
So that is, lastly, then our question is back to the quality assurance, and within your oversight function, what is that quality assurance process for each development project in related to risk for SOJDC? So when do you as Minister or Treasurer or shareholder officer intervene, and what does that quality assurance process look like for each development?
So the quality assurance is engagement of expert review of the individual project, looking to see where, for example, some of those aspects that you're concerned about with regard to the risks of whether the demand will be there for them. I think we'll include that. Probably add to that, of course, we're closely connected with colleagues colleagues who report to the Housing Minister. As the Minister will say, we looked at the affordability, the number of affordable units have to be put into any individual one of these transactions will obviously be fed in by the housing team. The longer term projections in terms of housing demand are obviously within that team as well, so we have access into that team. But then we also access experts in the review of those projects to understand whether we've got the costs right, looking at the cost calculations for that project, and also looking at the likely sales.
And within that process, you may obviously end up with a final decision to make, or you will, on any of these projects. Something like South Hill has, of course, had a huge amount of expenditure on it, probably about £4 million now. Are you comfortable that the oversight function remains objective enough to the state's finances that it can ultimately say no when no is needed, and that you will always be happy to make that decision?
Expect third-party assurance to be objective.
Yeah, so we've there are other projects in the past, not necessarily SOJDC, where we've raised significant challenges back to the boards at different points in time, so the challenge is robust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for those. I've just got some general questions about the budget, and my sort of couple of questions are around the impact of the amendments of the 2025 budget. Obviously, there was some unexpected as a government, I guess. So the question really is about where the funds have come from to offset the changes brought by the approved amendments, and whether there's been any specific trade-offs that have been made that we're aware, that you can make us aware of, to accommodate the approved amendments.
Well, the ones that were accepted by government, because whether they were accepted as are or subject to amendment. The budget has been published as amended, so it's out there now. The amendments will be reflected in heads of expenditure for relevant departments. So in terms of things like public realm and infrastructure rolling vote, the relevant minister will have to look at prioritisation, may have to do some replanning, but that is a matter for him to do, to work out how he spends that budget. There is a relatively small amount in the Cabinet Office that has to be found, and the department will have to identify how to implement it, and that will be done through reprioritisation. There isn't new money, we don't magic up any new money, we just have to shuffle it round. So some projects, it may be that things that ministers would have wanted to do will have to not be done because they have, because of the amendments.
Okay.
So it's going to be a matter of prioritisation
For individual
within
ministers.
within the departments where, so public realm, West Island planning, that will have to be prioritised within public realm, and then Cabinet Office, Connect Me funding, they will have to find 78,000 for Statistics Jersey and 86 for the Connect Me funding. But overall, they are relatively modest, and those departments will have to be reprioritising and replanning to make the amendments.
Thank you. Decision was also required from you to approve the transfer of up to 25 million from the Consolidated Fund to the Stabilisation Fund, based on the availability of funds in the Consolidated Fund at 31st of December, or from budgeted underspends. Can you let us know what those actions? Yeah. What's happened?
That will still be pending the accounts, is it?
Oh, yeah, so we're just.
So we're still going through
currently
year end now.
Walking through the end of the year end to finalise the numbers.
Okay, so you'll be able to tell us that at the next, we'll know exactly where that's come from at the next hearing. Okay, thank you. Alex, back to you.
Right, we'll move on to your response, Minister, to this panel's scrutiny report on the budget, and we'll just dive into a couple of the recommendations, if that's okay. So we'd like to first ask about recommendation 19, which recommended that a more robust framework for the monitoring of the longer-term effects of revenue-raising measures on consumers, businesses and the economy should be established.
Sorry, can you bear with me
I
till
will,
I
of
find
course.
my notes?
Page 26 of your response.
Find mine. Let's pull it two. Hold on. Where did that come? Sorry. Right. Okay. Sorry, which one did you?
Recommendation 19, looking at the long-term effects of revenue-raising measures on including that of excise on businesses, consumers and the economy.
Sorry, I'm struggling to find it. 19.
19.
Oh, sorry.
So with regards to that recommendation, of course, it was rejected. So if you are able to further explain the government view that further analysis would not materially improve decision-making, the panel would be interested to understand the rationale.
I think we do, the suggestion that we make changes and ignore them, I mean, clearly we do look at them in terms of the revenue raising measures. We do consult widely on all changes and with the most affected groups. We do speak to regularly, so I think adding in more bureaucracy, we don't think it'll add a great deal. Unless you'd like to add anything to that.
Well, there is obviously
I don't have that in my...
cost and ambiguity trade-off for such a longer-term framework, isolating specifically the impacts over that long term will be quite a difficult thing to do, taking out all of the factors that contribute to that. Whenever we're reviewing a particular measure, or whether we're looking to bring something forward, we do look to research that's taken place elsewhere and anything locally that we can avail ourselves of. For example, we will draw from the what's it called, JOLS, is all I know as Opinions and Lifestyle report from the Statistics Unit. Also draw from any statistics that are out there that are relevant. Look at those policies that are implemented by other small jurisdictions, for example. So we do what I would describe as a proportionate level of research into new tax measures, and draw upon in particular the work that my colleagues on the international front do in terms of being clear as to which direction we should take on international tax measures. So I think it's proportionate to the size of our jurisdiction and proportionate to the size of government.
Is the government seeing other jurisdictions that are very good at proactively understanding and modelling their data? Are you looking to learn from best practice, or are you quite happy that, being a small island, we ultimately, sounds like we have to run on more anecdote than perhaps data? That proportion. I'm trying to, because it sounded.
The data's not necessarily that deep in other jurisdictions either relating to that, but for example, back a long time when we first implemented long-term care charge, Guernsey had done it. We talked to Guernsey about the lessons to be learned on the implementation of that, and we could look and indeed it was pulled out in scrutiny reports as well, relating to evidence from elsewhere. When we're looking at, for example, you may come onto it, vaping, or strategies relating to tobacco, for example, we're looking at research that's available from elsewhere. In this case on vaping, looking to see what research other places have been doing in implementing the particular tax.
We're going to touch on vaping, so I think we shouldn't stray too far into it yet, because we've got a few recommendations we want to cover. So recommendation 20 as well recommends that the scope for economic modelling be expanded to include more detailed assessments of how revenue measures interact with the broader economic and social factors, such as things like household income levels, business growth, and sector-specific productivity. Now, this recommendation was partially accepted, and it was commented that work is underway to further improve the quality of data and the understanding of the impact of fiscal decisions where necessary. It's a real mouthful, these recommendations. But could you therefore outline 3 examples of work taking place, how it's being undertaken, and the outcomes that you're anticipating from that?
3. Well, I'll
3 would
start
be
with
lovely.
the vaping, the work that's been done is looking at how that's been implemented elsewhere, looking at the options for that implementation, consulting with colleagues in particular in health in terms of the case for that particular taxation. Now, the case for is largely a health agenda. We're looking at how that particular tax can be best implemented by drawing upon what's happening elsewhere. I would then say that in the last couple of years we've been looking to bring it more onto the table at different tax structure or AMPA structures, duty structures related to keg relief. It's been a topic of discussion, as well as
It's to what,
trying
sorry?
to keg relief for
Cake relief.
Cost relief.
What did you think?
I thought you said cake relief.
Cake relief. I've been testing that out exclusively.
Yes, yes.
Keg relief for budget clubs, restaurants, etc. So we've been looking to that. We've been talking also, of course, with local representative groups, and we've also been looking at how measures could encourage not entirely only local, but small distillers, for example. I can throw a colleague to tax policy colleagues who've now been thinking of the third one to present to you.
Well, we would have done a lot of that in
Aircraft.
the modelling for Pillar 2. There was a lot of data analysis, which we've talked about before. And the fourth example would be on the introduction of the innovation incentive. When that was brought in, we did a very careful analysis of who it might apply to, who could avail of it, worked quite closely with the JFSC and the data that they had about the breakdown of the financial services sector.
I think the other point to make, also touching on recommendation 19, is you mentioned the excise duties. The excise duties are all specific, and routinely the government uprates them by inflation. In recent years, actually less than inflation. So all other things being equal, I think I would argue that you don't need to do a great deal of analysis of the impact of revalorisation by inflation, because all you are doing is maintaining the real value of those excise duties. And if you don't maintain their real value, then obviously the danger is that they lose their efficacy in terms of any health or environmental benefits.
Okay.
Recommendation 23 asks that proposals for a fuel duty replacement policy be included within the next iteration of the budget, but the government responded that this was not a priority for the 26 budget. Can you explain the rationale for that, and in particular how it aligns with the carbon neutral objectives?
Well, we have looked at the figures for purchase, if you like. So we've looked at the volumes of petrol sales as opposed to electric vehicles. And while you would expect petrol sales to be declining, they are not declining anything like as quickly as we thought. So there is no immediate benefit because we are not seeing a significant. I mean, there is a bit of a reduction in excise duty from petrol, but not as significant. And we're not looking at a cliff edge. You know, the decline is very much more marked than is very much more unmarked than we would anticipated. So it's not something that we feel we need to do urgently when we do have other things that we do need to prioritise this year. It hasn't gone away. We will revisit it. We'll keep an eye on that because there are, you know, we've done policy work in terms of what might that look like, and I think it's generally come down to one of two things, both of which have their difficulties. In
Two
implementation.
things
Well, you either tax the car or you find a way of taxing usage of electric vehicles. Taxing a car prejudices people who use their car once a week. You know, the older members of the committee use the car once a week and have to pay the same tax as everybody else. And trying to capture usage for electric vehicles involves technology, which I think, did we say Switzerland use?
Switzerland are one of the longest users
Have
of
got some form
road
of,
user
put a black
charging.
box in your car to report, and we know some people are not going to like that idea either. So that's not suggesting there. I mean, whether there is some kind of hybrid of those, I don't know. But the fact is, the sales of electric vehicles, while they're there, they are not. People are not abandoning them en masse for electric vehicles. So the need, and I think you can't. Well, the need is not as marked as we thought because we are still getting revenue from petrol sales.
And you're confident in that, even though last year there was, I believe, quite a significant uptake in electric vehicles, and I don't know whether you have the data yet for petrol diesel sales for last year, but my understanding is that it was showing a steeper decline than had been the case in previous years.
Well, I can't remember when we last looked at it, but it wasn't a steep decline. It's very, very gradual, and there is still funds going into the carbon neutral roadmap. Still gets funds from
Climate Emergency Fund.
Climate Emergency Fund. Sorry, whichever one gets fund from petrol duties. So there is still money going in there.
Finding 33, vaping tax policy here you go. Vaping tax policy will be developed in 2025. Is it the intention that proposals for vaping taxation will be brought forward in the next budget?
Yes, we've met regularly. We've met relevant ministers. I think I've met all the ministers that have an interest. People are supportive, and we are working on that with a view to it being in the budget for next year.
Okay. And have you assessed revenue from that, or is it seen as a deterrent policy rather than a revenue raising?
It's more about, well, for me, it is more about the health impacts of trying to dissuade children and young people from vaping. But that has to be balanced with the need to try and not encourage people to smoke instead. So there is a balance of keeping vaping less expensive than tobacco, that people who are trying to stop smoking are not dissuaded from going to vapes at a level that might dissuade young people. But as we were just discussing at lunchtime, there are all sorts of other products out there that are even more attractive to the youth market than vaping, it appears.
Okay. Final one in this section. The recommendation 34 was about the stabilisation fund and the social security fund, and suggested they be included in the next budget. The response notes that work will continue to review the objectives of States Fund, including the stabilisation fund, although there was no comment regarding the social security fund. this recommendation was accepted, and does this mean that new proposals for the Social Security Fund and the Stabilisation Fund will be brought forward in the next budget?
We're looking at, there are as I recollect, there's quite a large number of funds. Some of the objectives could do, and I think there's an element of prioritisation. Do you want to?
So at the
Talk about
moment,
that
sorry if there's anything leading having gone on, I don't think we're proposing at this point to do the Social Security Fund.
You're not going to...
For the next budget.
Okay.
We'll look at the Stabilisation Fund, because of course we are carrying some risk in terms of the aims of having the Stabilisation Fund as part of the fiscal strategy, or the safety net, as it were, in place without the Stabilisation Fund having funds in it. So we see the priority Stabilisation Fund, Social Security Fund, less so, given that it's a longer term fund to address longer term ageing demographic as well, documented in legislation.
So when you say you're going to address it in the budget, does that mean you're going to address it in terms of what it says aims and objectives are, or its recapitalisation, or both?
We will be reviewing aims and objectives. We might well look at alternative aims of achieving those objectives, and capitalisation. We generally take a steer from history and the views of the FBP in terms of what target that should have, but that should highly likely be, well, it will be part of the consideration as to what the target value should be.
So you'll be potentially setting a new target value?
Oh, we'll be looking at historically what we've needed to put into it, and we may give consideration. We will give consideration whether we will be explicit in the highly different matter.
Okay, thank you. This is a bit of an oblique question, but it came up in the hearing with Children Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny panel. We made a recommendation as part of the budget review that there should be further detail provided about how government grant funding is used to support the third sector, particularly any funding that's used to commission essential services. The Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning said that that was a question for the Minister for Treasury and Resources, hence asking that now. So the question really is about what your thoughts are about the principles of the government budget providing more transparency about grants under 75,000 to the third sector.
Under 75,000.
Whether you think that would be useful or not.
Those could be very small amounts of money going to all kinds of bodies. When if you look at the arts, heritage and culture, there's some very small sums of money going out. And I think those are, I'm not sure if they're reported, I've seen lists. I think when you drill down to under 75, it becomes there's quite a lot of effort for, I'm not quite sure there's a return. I mean, we've got the figure of 75, and I think we report on accounts of all those entities. I'm not sure about how I'm assuming that the accountable officer in the relevant department will be looking at money spent. You know, if services are being commissioned from a charitable body in health or care or whatever, I'd imagine that there will be someone in health who's looking at the outcome of that spending.
Okay, so you wouldn't be
They are
looking
better
to do...
placed to look at outcomes than we are, I would think.
Treasurer, did you want to...
Favour a framework within the Public Finance Manual Committee to keep that under regular review. Our focus in Treasury is more around those CNH you described as arm's length bodies, which are those that are constituted by the Assembly either to deliver services or regulate services that might also be delivered by government, and those that are over, I think we're looking at a threshold of about £250,000, and where their turnovers over £500,000, looking at governance with regards to those, and whether that governance in its detail is better delivered through the PFM or from Public Finances Manual, or through the Public Finances Manual, making it clear what to expect within each of the grant agreements with those entities to cover issues of governance. The expectation is that grants, be they above or below £75,000, should be done in furtherance of the aims of the particular minister, preferably by reference to the CSP, but shouldn't be used for purposes outside of the purposes of the department or minister.
Yeah, okay, understood. Thank you.
We published a whole swathe of accounts earlier this year of the bodies over 75. I said, this is ridiculous. Can we look to trim this down? Because there's so many bodies putting accounts out. And when we looked at it, increasing the level above 75, it made very little difference until you got to quite significant numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Project Breakwater. As one of the ministers on the oversight body, the Generation Steering Group, for this work stream, can you explain your role and involvement to date?
Not a great deal. We have, I had a briefing quite a long time ago on it, but it is still a work in progress, and it will come to Regeneration Steering Group and COM. It hasn't been formally to Regeneration Steering Group or COM, so it is still work in development.
Is there anything at all you can tell people about it?
Not in terms of, I mean, I think the officers have been involved in kind of high-level discussions, but it is still, I believe, it's still quite a high-level state. So
And
in
you're not
terms
involved in any of those
of the
discussions?
package, it hasn't come to those forums yet. It would come to Regeneration Steering Group or Council of Ministers, but it is still being worked up with officers.
But can I just be clear about this? Because we're talking about potentially very large sums of money. You're the Treasury Minister and you're not involved in those
I think the
discussions.
officers are having some discussions.
So-
I have had a briefing some time ago, but an overall view. But in terms of that all coming together, it was some time ago. I haven't seen the overall structure, but you can go away and decide whatever you want, but until you come through with business cases and get all those approvals, nobody's committed to anything. So-
Treasurer, are you able to fill us in on any more?
So, I will talk more to long-term capital plans and financing of those. So we have in our business plan for the current year, and I think we said it as much in the budget last year, that we would now be turning to, a great deal of work's been undertaken as to, with regard, 25-year capital programme, the needs that are out there, the various demands, the timescales with which they should be delivered. We'll take that to the Council of Ministers. And then also, and it's been a position within Treasury for a while, we need to look at other ways of funding some of that capital. And obviously, there are already out there other ways of funding that capital. So Andy Holmes is one example. What SOJDC is doing is another example. We're not just limited to that. We have the borrowing in place for the phase one of the health facilities, of course, but what we're trying to do at the moment is capture that need and or demand for the longer term capital programme, so we can get the sequencing right and then look to see how much more than can be directly afforded from tax receipts in the short term, how much, what funding strategies we may use for that longer term capital investment, which would include certain elements, I'm sure, are within the Breakwater project.
Okay, so Project Breakwater is a subset of a group of things that wouldn't be able to be funded under the normal allocations through a budget.
Well, I think I would be careful not to describe it as a subset.
It's the whole set.
I would say it would include some of the things that are within the subset. High priority amongst those politically and from the community, I think, is Port Region and the funding of that, which you might take outside of that and in advance of Budget 26 or within Budget 26. But there are other aspects within the list that might be included in Project Breakwater than just capital costs.
Not just capital costs. Okay. And just finally then, on Project Breakwater, so are there any red lines at all in this? I mean, could we be talking about borrowing? Could we be talking about leveraging existing states' funds? Is there anything that you can say about what is not included in scope of Project Breakwater in terms of financing?
So I'm not going to talk about Breakwater, I'm going to talk about capital options to fund capital. There's not usually red lines in place. We will look at all options. So previously we have eliminated other options when we'll be looking at the hospital facilities, for example, and that has got to match both ministers and Assembly risk appetite for those various options. In the case of borrowing, we've gone for what we think is the right risk-reward trade-off, which is invariably on the bigger capital projects, sovereign bond issuance as opposed to shorter-term bank loan issuance. But in looking to learn some lessons from previous issuances of previous debt strategies, we're using the revolving credit facility as and when we, as you go through the early construction phases until we issue a bond for a larger amount further down the line. So we haven't got a closed mind to certain approaches, but we will always bear in mind the degree of risk that certain approaches entail.
I think the issue here is the public know that there's something happening, and government is shedding virtually no light on it at all at the moment. I mean, as Treasury Minister, what level of oversight are you going to have over Project Breakwater?
I would have the level of oversight that you would expect of a significant project, which will be, it depends on what Breakwater looks like, it depends on what the elements are, it will depend on the timing of various elements and how we decide to structure it financially.
Okay, I'll move on to the new healthcare facilities. Unless nobody else got anything on that? Okay. Are you able to give us any update on the new healthcare facilities in terms of your oversight function? What have you been doing recently?
Well, we have a meeting this week. I think there was a meeting in December that was cancelled. There normally are monthly meetings. The December one was cancelled. So there will be one this week to see where they are. So there are normally monthly meetings. The Treasury team work closely. We have a business partner embedded within the project, a Treasury Finance business partner, and the project team meets regularly with Treasury officials. So I will have my first meeting of the year on Wednesday, I think, to see where we are, to see what the current updates are.
And those meetings address what?
They address where we are in the project, just where we are in the project.
I mean, to what extent do you question the Minister about what he's doing with the money, whether he's got specific plans for it and so on?
Well, it's all, they have to follow programme and they have to follow capital and delivery frameworks, and they have to do that under the Public Finances Manual, and we expect them to do that. And so their costs are being tracked, are being tracked against forecasts. Forecasts are reviewed regularly. We've got monthly management accounts at project level. Financial reporting will have internal and external review. So there is a lot of oversight going on this at various levels within the organisation, within all the appropriate frameworks, and corporate CPMO, Corporate Portfolio Management Office, their delivery framework. So those are all being followed.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Okay, Max.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Minister, I'd like to move on to the living wage, and I'd just like to have an understanding to the extent that you are involved with other ministers with the transition to a living wage in regards to the oversight across the next 2 years.
Well, this is falls within the remit of the cost of living group, which again meets regularly, although we last met in October. I think it does meet about quarterly generally. We'll meet again at the end of January. There's a terms of reference. That group has a published terms of reference, I believe. And we have the business support package rests primarily with the Minister for Economic Development, and his team helped develop that. Myself and the Minister for Social Security are also on that group. And we approved the overall package as a way of helping businesses deal with the living wage. So we will monitor over the next couple of years, we will be monitoring the effectiveness of that package as it's rolled out.
Yeah. I do note, Minister, that there has been a bit of confusion among some members of the public who I've certainly engaged with in regards to the transition to a living wage. Some people have mentioned that it was supposed to be just covering the baseline wage increase, but then there's also been mention about economic productivity. So I was wondering whether if you could just maybe elucidate the panel on your understanding of what the government is intending to do.
I think the Minister for Economic Development, I think, was always clear that what this was not going to be was giving businesses money. It wasn't just giving people money, grants to help meet their wage bill. It had to be more focused and targeted than that. So that's why the funds that are there are aimed at boosting productivity in the relevant industries, and there are grants there to help people introduce new technology or new measures to help them boost productivity, because better productivity will itself help mitigate the effect of higher wages. Similar with skills, there's more funding available for people to invest in apprenticeships and training, and there are the wider elements of the package, which is about increasing visitor numbers and making sure that we have got because those are the sectors that are most likely to be impacted. So hospitality and retail, they are the packages and the rural marine sector. Those are the areas that are most likely to be impacted. So the various schemes have been devised with them in mind.
Yeah, and just one more question from me. Obviously, there is a great risk in terms of public funds being used to transition firms to a living wage. And of course, there's been a report that was published, I think it was in late 2023, by the Jersey Employment Forum, and that mentioned that transitioning to a living wage would potentially impact businesses. And do you believe that could still be the case, and public funds could be used, and some of those firms might not be able to make the transition to a living wage?
I'm not quite sure. Well, firms will be expected to pay the new minimum wage when it comes in April. I think it will go up on the 1st of April. It was delayed from the beginning of January, I believe, by the Minister. Firms will be expected to pay the minimum wage, and I think we will be, if people apply for grants, I'm sure there will be a degree of rigour. They're going to be they're going to be administered, I think, by Jersey Business, and we'd expect Jersey Business to apply a degree of rigour in who they are providing money to make sure that that is not money that's lost. I think several of them have to be match funded, so the business will have to invest an element of money into apprenticeships, and will get funding from the government as well to help pay for those apprenticeships. But that fund...
Service levels and performance for Revenue Jersey, detailing any current concerns that have been identified, as well as steps taken to address these. And to give an example, that could be things like the time to answer a call, responding to written requests, the time taken to assess tax returns, all those kind of things.
I do have lots of numbers on
I'd
that.
love
I
some
think
numbers.
it might be better if the controller, he's much more au fait with it. I could read out the numbers, but he probably could do it much better. If you don't mind.
Okay, yes, of course. We do now have the annual statistics for 2024. So in respect of telephony, for 2024, 84% of calls were answered first time. As I've said before, it's quite difficult to measure first time, but essentially that people who call us will usually get through on the same day, I think is the safest way to interpret it. It was 78% in 2023, so that's a 6 percentage point improvement. We had over 34,000 enquiries by email and online form and letters and so on. The vast majority of those, now over 25,000, use our online forms, and that has enabled us to answer most enquiries within 3 working days, which is a considerable improvement on where we were a few years ago when we did accept free-form enquiries via general email and so on.
So within that, that's some positive news within the stats. Is it possible to drill into a few of those examples as to what are the improvements that delivered that change? So,
well,
is
yes,
it cultural, or was it
I mean,
actually activities by the department?
Well, I would say the largest driver of the very significant reduction in waiting times for written inquiries is the online form. And the reason for that is that the online form asks customers to provide a set of information, which they do provide first time. So by getting rid of free-form email, we've eliminated the tennis match that used to go on, where a customer might ask a question, but they hadn't provided the information, and we had to go back and forth. So that's very significantly improved things. Also, we do use the Jersey Lean system, and we have done quite a lot of work on what's called workload balancing. So I think our frontline managers and middle managers are getting a lot more intelligent in terms of how they're allocating resources between the different channels. Okay. So we are now a bit more responsive in terms, for example, if we see that the call volumes are increasing at a certain time of day, we're more flexible in diverting resources to deal with that.
Brilliant.
So that works quite well.
So staying on that, on the topic of kind of customer service, would you say, or do you see customer service levels differing between those inquiring for personal taxation or those inquiring on corporate taxation, whether it be for their employer return, ITIS, or even obviously for corporate tax?
Yes.
And if so, how do they differ?
Yes, I mean, we discussed this at the last hearing. We obviously divide labour and specialise. So there are people who are trained to deal with personal income tax, people who are trained to deal with employers on ITIS and social security contributions, and there are people who focus on corporate taxpayers and so on. And the challenge always is personal income tax because of the volumes. So you know, the levels of service can vary across the year and between different service areas. I mean, just finishing on the other statistics, personal tax assessing is also continuing to improve. So we are now routinely issuing 82% of assessments within 30 days of receiving the tax return. The only time in the year when that begins to degrade is really around the final deadline of the year, where we still get far too many taxpayers who leave it till the very last moment
Close to the wire.
to submit a tax return.
Okay.
And then we are, of course, contrary to the belief of many, we still see about 25,000 taxpayers a year come into the office face to face, which is an extraordinary number. But we're seeing, you know, often between 75 and 100 people a day at the help desk.
And has there been any impact, if any, from prioritisation exercises by other departments, such as digital, on your ability to keep delivering improvements to customer service?
Well, we have a very close relationship with our digital colleagues, and you know, there's been a great deal of discussion about prioritisation. So we always have a wish list of things we want to do. The next big priority for us, which digital services are supporting, is the contributions function integration project, which is due to be implemented very early in February. So that will be effectively the transfer of all contributions work into our revenue management system. It will no longer be in the NESI system. And then when the NESI system is replaced, it will focus entirely on benefits, and contributions management going forward will be entirely within Revenue Jersey.
And
The next big challenge for them is independent taxation. In that we need to be in a position to issue ITIS effective rates this coming autumn on an independent tax basis. But alongside that, and co-equal in priority, I would say, is obviously the Pillar 2 taxes. So Digital Service are providing a lot of support to us in the development of the 2 new Pillar 2 taxes.
So would it be fair to say that the priority is on the back-end processes to map to our obligations, whether it be independent taxation or Pillar 2, and not necessarily to quality of life improvements for citizens and businesses in their interactions?
Well, there are quite a lot of improvements to the front end of our systems being rolled out as part of the contributions function integration. So the contributions function integration also includes a significant software update to the revenue management system. So there are various things, problems we're aware of, glitches that will be repaired through that. It's a continuing work. I mean, the tax system needs to develop every year. And as you say, it is an issue of prioritisation.
Okay, and then so finally, on that topic, is Revenue Jersey appropriately resourced currently? Are you holding any vacancies, suffering recruitment challenges, and if so, what's the impact of those?
Well, as I've said before, I think we've always been looked after quite well by ministers and the States Assembly. Whenever we've made business cases, they've either wholly or at least partially been satisfied. We do have the money we need for our business as usual operations. We were successful in the last government plan and budget in securing the immediate resources we need to help with the Pillar 2 taxes, but there will be more to come. We do always run with vacancies for all sorts of reasons, including to some extent pay bill management. But as I say, we are continuing to deliver improvements across the piece in terms of both customer service, managing tax compliance, and also driving forward the transformation programme.
Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about the implementation of independent taxation. Can you give us an update on the progress of that and the compensatory allowance?
Yes. At the moment, a lot of our resources have been devoted to implementing the contributions function integration, but the next thing that our team is working on is the development in detail now of the compensatory allowance and planning out the implementation. So independent taxation becomes live and law on the 1st of January 2026. Most taxpayers won't actually see real differences until 2027 when they come to do their first independent tax returns. But as I mentioned, in the autumn of this year, employed people will start to see changes to their ITIS effective rates. Now, if a married couple, at the moment, they will tend to have the same ITIS effective rate in independent taxation, depending on how much they earn. One of them might see their ITIS rate reduce considerably, the other might see their ITIS rate increase considerably. So we need to explain that to people. We have put this booklet out with tax returns, so that's just landing on people's doormats. And I see there have been a few comments in the media about it. And then the next big communication will be in September of this year, when we really start to engage people with the changes they will begin to see as the IT system changes.
You've mentioned about explanation, and certainly this scrutiny panel made some recommendations about communication and the like. Just an example there, you've said that independent taxation booklets are going out with tax returns, but presumably in a married couple, they only go out to the man.
Yes.
Yes.
I suppose that will be true. The tax return is still addressed to the man, and the man will have received it with the tax return.
And recent emails as well that have been sent out introducing independent taxation have only been sent to the man, which is obviously of great concern to women who are taxpayers. Given that email addresses are provided to the tax department of wives, is there any plan to share the independent taxation booklet or the emails with wives?
Are wives' email addresses routinely captured? I don't remember ever providing mine.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I'd
I'm
have
not
to
sure.
check.
My
No,
name is even on the
you
tax
do
return.
make a good point. I perhaps should go away and reflect on that.
Please. Again, my last question was going to be, how are you ensuring that communications are targeted and accessible? Because 50% of the population, certainly those who are married, are not receiving your communications.
Yes. One hopes in the generality of happy marriages that the husband is sharing the brochure with his wife. I know,
Or just putting it straight in the recycling.
I know Deputy Gorst is. As we were discussing it only last week.
I make light of it, but it is an important
No,
point.
indeed, yes.
My last question about revenue, can you update us on the work underway to recover the debts in relation to the co-funded payroll scheme?
Our co-funded payroll scheme is the Treasurer.
Yeah.
Well, I won't clarify that matter, but just to update you on that then, of course, you shouldn't lose sight of the reason for the scheme in the first place, which was to ensure that businesses could survive through the pandemic and thereafter. So our debt management approach has been one that's sensitive to the impacts of pulling that debt back too quickly. The previous government, we took specific policies to them. We are on the cusp of bringing to the Minister changing those that are more attuned to the reducing interest rate environment, for example, bring those through to the Minister for further action further down the line.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand you over to Deputy Commissar.
Yes, onto the fairly benign subject of MOUs. As it's a recurring item, and as you'll be aware, these are required to be reviewed every 3 years, the last one being in 2022. So on a general point, could you please update us on progress and timeline of the process?
Yeah, well, the review is due by May. The review is due by May of this year. On our side, we are looking at recent changes to the UK Corporate Governance Code to see if there's anything in, the current thinking in terms of governance standards that might affect MOUs. We're looking at some recent CNAG reports to see to the extent they have an impact. There may be a few things we build into the MOUs as a result of those things. The boards of each of the SOEs have been, we've had some consultation with them, and we've asked them to give us feedback on any observations or thoughts they have by the end of this month. And we are also looking at some, just sort of kind of practical things. So, for example, remuneration, I seem to have spent a long time looking at various proposals for salary. I want to see if we can bring those together better in terms of timing. That it may not be possible because I think we all do things at different times, but if we can try and create more consistency around timing of increases for staff and executive, we're probably going to look at bringing in a requirement for board effectiveness reviews and an explicit requirement for succession planning.
Okay, well,
Those are the things that we are expecting or thinking about building in and we are on track to complete the review by the end of May.
Well, thank you for answering my second question without my answering it, asking it anyway. One item you didn't mention there was, will you be looking particularly in relation to the method of operation of, I suggest, particularly the development company, in the sense it's having thrust upon it or transferred to it overall control of such matters as development of Fort Regent, which perhaps weren't anticipated to come within its normal ambit. I think the concern will be as to the provisions within the MOU to ensure that what they were doing was fully understood by.
I don't think that's for the MOU. The MOU is much more about their general governance, how we respond to them as shareholder, how they manage themselves as a company. I haven't had the sense from them that they feel oppressed by being asked to do anything with Fort Regent. I think they are.
They might not. My concern is that I'm assuming here that as we go forward, that scrutiny panel, whether this scrutiny panel or those responsible for individual items like economics for Ports of Jersey will have a say in it or be consulted. So my next question is, you kindly schedule the things you're looking at. Will you be advising the scrutiny panels or asking the each individual state's own entity to be liaising with the panels as to what they are thinking in terms of?
I'm not sure that's something we've thought about. No, I don't know. I imagine you'll see the MOUs in due course. I would have thought we'd share those with scrutiny.
As I know,
yes.
last occasion, certainly one panel did, and that was useful for all
I'm sure the relevant, the MOUs will be shared with scrutiny as appropriate.
So going back to my general question, on the outcomes of your review, you'll be highlighting those to the companies concerned, and getting their feedback, or how would you be doing it?
It's a negotiated project. We're not just going to impose.
No, I'm not talking about imposing. It'd be collaborative.
It will be discussed and agreed with them. Yes.
The point I'm making is,
I don't think of the things we've suggested. I don't think there's anything I would expect to be particularly controversial.
Or could I simply ask then that scrutiny is appraised of those discussions so that we're aware of it?
Well, when we get to once we've got an amended version in close to final form, I'd imagine, or in final form, those will be shared with you.
And going back to the timeline, because
End of May.
Yeah, okay, so there'll be
within timeline.
So it's in hand now, so we expect to see something within a couple of months, maybe.
I'm not that well. We are on track to have them by the end of May in terms of how long it takes for us to produce a draft, for them to amend it, for them to put input into it, to see what their amendment. There are 5. They all may want different things. I don't want to commit beyond. We are on track for the end of May.
So take it from that, there've been no recent board meetings with the companies concerned to take stock of where you're at, but there will be in short order.
I meet them quarterly. I meet all the SOEs quarterly. I missed one recently because I was delayed because of the storm, but I meet with them all quarterly to talk about, salient issues, the risk register, the finances, particularly any operational issues, operational significant developments. But we have not discussed the MOUs as such because those are things that will, I don't think we will be refining and enhancing them. I think it's an evolution. It's an evolution of something that's already there. And I would be astonished if we end up with some kind of standoff with them saying we're not signing that.
And I'm not expecting that. My concern is on behalf of scrutiny, let's have our say. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Can we move on to Pillar 2? So perhaps Deputy Gorst can switch on his microphone or get ready for this. So before we move to the international situation, could I just ask for an update in terms of what the general response has been from the business community in particular since the adoption of Pillar 2 by the States Assembly in October? Has there been feedback in terms of just the local response?
Minister, do you want me to take that?
Yes, please. I was expecting you to.
Yes, there has. There's been engagement between the department and local businesses. I think I would categorise it as mostly technical in nature, i.e. asking questions about what it will mean for them in specific cases. The working groups have continued, so I think there's been 27 mailbox questions from in-scope companies. A small number thanking us for our ongoing engagement, but as I said, mostly the questions and engagement have really been technical questions, which we are then using, have either already used, I should say, to update the guidance or using it to think about the next iterations of guidance.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we've got a new administration in the United States, and very early on, President Trump issued an executive order, or 2 executive orders, I think, with relevance in this area. What are you doing what's your first blush response to the American actions and what effect they might have here?
Well, yes, you're right, Deputy. There's 2 executive orders, one directly aimed at the OECD international tax agenda, even called that. And the second one is really around America First trade policy. And you'll be aware that the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, a day or a couple of days later, relodged, in effect, a proposal which Republicans had previously put before Congress about retaliatory measures that the US could take. If we take the first executive order, which is connected with Pillar 2, it talks there about other jurisdictions which have introduced taxes which are discriminatory and extraterritorial. We take a view which thankfully has really been iterated by other US and global commentators, that discriminatory and extraterritorial is referring to 2 things. One is digital services taxes, and we remind ourselves that Pillar 1 was really developed in response to countries' digital services taxes when the OECD agreed to try and deliver a multilateral approach to that. And then secondly is the UTPR, the under-taxed profit rules. And I suppose the first thing to say about both of those is that in our engagement with Republicans on the Hill throughout the last 18 months, the actions that President Trump have now taken in these orders are actions that they explained to us they would have expected Republican administrations to take. And therefore, certainly in regard to the undertaxed profit rules, we, for all the reasons we explained to the sub-panel, don't believe in extraterritoriality of tax. We believe in tax neutrality. People should only pay tax due in Jersey, roughly on Jersey profits. And therefore, we didn't introduce an undertaxed profit rules, as we explained. When it comes to digital services taxes, we have never previously had a plan to introduce digital services taxes, and I'm not aware that we have a plan into the future. The executive order instructed the US Treasury to spend 60 days coming up with countermeasures or proposals that would deal with this discriminatory and extraterritorial approach. So we won't be absolutely certain until that report is published in 60 days. And the reason I just had an element of hesitancy is that although international commentators are saying digital services taxes and under tax profit rules, there is an outside chance that they might also bring into scope IIR rules. But we'll have to wait to see what that report says in 60 days.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very, very comprehensive. I guess the bottom line is we've voted for a budget on the basis that there was 52 million was the bottom end of the taxation expectation that would come from Pillar 2. Is there anything in this that has led you to believe that that might now be over-optimistic, or are you still confident that 52 million is a reasonable estimate?
I suppose it's actually slightly the other way around. It makes us relieved that we were cautious in our forecast and the amounts that we put in the budget, that we did the right thing. We can't be 100% certain until we have that report that US Treasury will do in 60 days' time. But if our view, and the view of, more importantly, of course, of international tax commentators, is borne out in that report, then we will continue to have faith in that forecast.
Can I ask then just a broader question, which is the direction of travel seems to be to try and repatriate American money back to America, and companies are going to be encouraged to do that, it seems. And the Irish government certainly has raised the alarm that it might mean that billions of pounds of tax revenue in Ireland might end up disappearing back to the United States. Is there a broader fear that companies that are based here at the moment will feel pressure to return home? American companies.
Well, if we, that's an interesting question, which I suppose in some ways falls rather more under the American First Trade Policy order. We heard President Trump tell business leaders at Davos that if they made their products in America, they didn't need to have any fear of tariffs. Of course, Jersey's economy is a service-based economy, and therefore things are quite different. American companies, if we look at it the other way round, i.e. American companies make profits and want to invest and trade with the rest of the world. That is what Jersey facilitates, not so much the other way round. And therefore, I think we can continue to be confident that our model is one that we can have faith in and will continue to be successful. So our model is Jersey is used by American companies, American funds who want to take positions around the rest of the world. And I think that's also reinforced, although this is a point much more about the UK economy. You'll have heard the UK Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, say that he believes that the UK had a case to make when it came to a potential implementation of tariffs, because the UK didn't have trade deficits with the UK, not surpluses, and therefore there was an argument for the UK. I think there is an even stronger argument for Jersey that we are facilitating American companies to make profits around the world. And we also know, and you know, Deputy, from your work on the sub-panel, that in Jersey's MSIT, we actually make provision for the mismatch between the US global approach to taxation and the OECD one. So we within our design are, we believe, helping to support American companies and that difficulty they find themselves in.
Okay. I'm going to summarise that and tell me if I'm wrong. You're at the moment cautiously optimistic that the Pillar 2 is on track from a Jersey point of view.
Well, I'm always optimistic because that's my natural outlook, but we will continue to work with the best talents across the island and internationally. But as we sit here, out with the report, that 60-day report, I'm confident that our MSIP will deliver for Jersey and also importantly will deliver for US companies.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question about implementation rather than the big global picture. The budget, as you said, included 9 people to help with the implementation, or money to recruit 9 people. Can you update us on whether how that recruitment is going and whether you are in shape to deliver this tax? I'm looking around the table here.
Sorry, Minister, you can answer that, yeah.
Well, I was going to let Cora answer it because she's probably closer to it. I've got
Go ahead.
Cora,
Yeah.
would you like to answer?
Certainly. So our plan for 2025 is basically a mixed plan of giving opportunities to people who are already in Revenue Jersey to step up and take some of these new roles in Pillar 2. We have in place a key position of implementation manager, which has been filled by a very experienced tax professional in Revenue Jersey who started on the 1st of January and is doing some great work in planning and working with some of the policy leads as well. We also have a business analyst from Revenue Jersey who's working alongside her, and we are also supporting the technical assistance for businesses that has been ongoing since October, once the legislation was adopted. So we have that post. It is operating very strongly as well. We have some external vacancies that we are in the process of trying to fill, working with an international recruitment firm, and that is a work in progress. It was always going to be a work in progress, and we were never going to find those people overnight, because we're looking for 2 technical tax experts on Pillar 2, a technical accounting expert, and we're also looking for a replacement for our policy lead, who is no longer with us. So we have quite a long list of candidates that have been identified by the recruitment agents. We have about 50 potential people who would meet our criteria, and we're working very closely with them to try and get that whittled down to a short list and try and get those interviewed. So it was a kind of an ongoing, the plan was to have ongoing recruitment through 2025 to meet that need. I would say it is on track, as in there is a lot of work that has been done, but it was never going to be straightforward.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Minister. My questions relate to our recommendations in our review, and obviously assume that what you hoped for then applies now, and I'm grateful for your positivity on that front. Our first recommendation was as to monitoring the impact of the multinational corporate income tax to ensure compliance with standards and make adjustments if required. And your response to that was the recommendation was noted, but it was important to highlight that the activities proposed are already embedded within existing processes, and therefore you basically rejected our recommendation on the basis that the existing mechanics were already in place. Would you care to elaborate on that and advise how you will in fact conduct such a review?
Minister, I'm not sure if you want me to try to answer that or...
Oh, sorry, yes, yes, please do.
Constable, as you said, a number of the sub-panels recommendations we noted and said that we already had similar processes in place. In this one, I think if you're talking about recommendation 1, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Could you just remind me? I'll just have to look on recommendation
Through it if you want.
1
If you've got the,
bear with me, sorry.
Page 5 of the scrutiny report.
I haven't got the actual report here. It's on page 5, yes.
Yes, so so we will, as we say, we've engaged with industry with the ongoing working groups. We've had response from in-scope companies, and so it's more of an iterative process than just undertaking an annual review. We will continue to ensure through all of these developments that we comply with the model rules, and I suppose that just taking one tax and doing a formal report to the Council of Ministers in that way doesn't make really any more logical sense than just the updating on what tax is doing throughout the normal course of interaction with the Council of Ministers, particularly in regard to the preparation for the annual budget, which Treasury do to ministers on an ongoing basis rather than just on an annual basis.
So regarding whatever form the annual analysis takes, how will that be made publicly available? Are you saying it will just be included in budget proposals, or will it come out as a separate item, or how will the public be aware of progress?
No, it will be really like all other taxes, just included in budget proposals.
Okay, thank you. And if I can move on to our recommendation 2, if you have it there, where we made a distinction between different forms of sources of income. Again, particularly as regard non-financial sectors and others, and you rejected that on the basis that, again, you didn't need to do it, and you basically conducted analysis of everything in total. Does that still apply, and do pronouncements from Washington or Davos actually suggest it might be necessary to pay greater attention to the distinction?
No, I don't. So I think it does. I think our response does still apply. We're trying to deal with it in a holistic manner, as the OECD rules require, rather than potentially giving any specific support to specific elements or sectors within the economy. The OECD rules are quite clear that it's got to be across economy for in-scope companies, and particularly when it comes to QRTCs, that's got to be across the economy as well. Again, as we sit here, I don't foresee any of the implications of the executive order or potentially work that US Treasury will do necessarily needing any changes to the approach that we have taken. We know, of course, however, that there are rules more widely within Pillar 2 around substance, but that's much more about big manufacturing organisations than it would be the differentials between sectors that we have in Jersey.
I think I'll leave my own questions at that. I'm not sure there are others or not.
Deputy Andrews had some more questions about the recommendations, I think.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. The panel notes with recommendation 3 that put forward that quarterly forums with in-scope stakeholders be held to review the progress of the Pillar 2 implementation. And the panel notes that this was rejected. And I'd like to understand, Minister, why this is.
Well, I think it really is about the sophistication of these in-scope companies, and they are by their very nature large multinational enterprises, and we shouldn't be seen to be offering either a helpline or these sorts of quarterly forums. If there are issues, we need to deal with them individually, because they will be fact specific to those international organisations. And so we have to deal with them in a, whilst we've got the law and we've got the guidance, the relationship is very fact specific with those individual organisations, and therefore we'll be dealing with them in that way and making ourselves available if there are any issues that crop up along the way, as Revenue Jersey staff have been doing all along. So the traditional approaches that we might think would be useful, we don't think are useful because of the sophistication of these organisations, some of whom might have tax departments even bigger than Revenue Jersey.
I understand, obviously, there is a confidential element holding quarterly forums with the relevant stakeholders. But would it not be a more inclusive approach to make sure that the government is receiving feedback from as many stakeholders as the government can do in order to improve the government's processes in relation to Pillar 2?
Well, of course, we want to, you are right to point out that we should be open to feedback, and we do want that feedback, but you will equally be aware that individual taxpayers, particularly of this sophistication, you would not want to have two similar organisations in a room with Revenue Jersey talking about their particular either debt raising requirements or how they're structuring debt or their tax requirements in front of someone else. It's just I suppose it's the magnitude of sophistication of these institutions which is different from other institutions. But my experience is that any corporate taxpayer wouldn't want to talk about their own tax issues in front of another taxpayer because they themselves are living in a competitive world.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Minister.
Did you have something you wanted to add there, Cora?
Chair, that was just the point that I was going to make, having dealt with them quite a lot. If they need to speak to the Minister, in some rare cases where it has, needed a meeting with the Minister, we have facilitated that. They don't want to have big open meetings with other taxpayers. They prefer to deal one-to-one.
Thank you very much, Cora. Minister, I'll just move on to the next question, and this regards recommendation 6 that the panel put forward. And this recommendation is very specific about providing some clarity over the government increasing the competitiveness in future. And of course, that would involve public funding. And of course, the executive response rejected this recommendation. And I just want to ascertain what was the reason for the executive rejecting the panel's recommendation.
Well, I suppose its genesis is in that we don't want to create an unnecessary element of additional bureaucracy when it comes to the use of Pillar 2 resources for income. The reality is, of course, although we've said that we don't accept it in the terms drafted, if the panel are saying it should be clear and transparent how we're spending the money, then we absolutely agree with that. but we believe that that clear transparency will be delivered in the normal annual budgeting process rather than having a secondary bureaucratic process on top of that annual budgeting process.
Obviously, the panel has a bit of experience. We've had one government budget where we've worked together and we've seen the different heads of expenditure. But with something like this, of course, it's a major transition that we have seen for Jersey's tax regime with the introduction of Pillar 2. And surely there'll be members in industry who will want to know what the government is doing to enable positive changes for them to be more productive. And so do you believe there has to be some lessons that have been learnt from this previous government budget that has been delivered and potentially some implementations that will improve the way how we work moving forward?
Yes, so I very much accept the point that you're driving at, Deputy, which is that we must be transparent with how this money is being spent, particularly when it comes to any allocations under the competitiveness badge, whether that's a QRTC or it's additional funding for marketing. We absolutely accept that we will be transparent, and members of the public and members of the states will be able to see that. I suppose we only differ in that we don't want to develop an additional bureaucracy outside of the annual budgeting process. The challenge that you're rightly making is, will we, and I think the answer to this is yes, will we make sure that the allocation of those resources in the annual budget plan is clear and transparent, and that is our intention.
Thank you very much, Minister. I've only got one more question, and this is in relation to recommendation 7, where the establishment of a dedicated team to assess risk and publish an annual risk report to identify emerging challenges was rejected. And I would just like to know why you came to that conclusion that this recommendation should be rejected.
I'm just struggling now to find recommendation 7 in my paperwork, so I apologise for that. Again, what we didn't want to do in all of this is, you're right to say it is a new tax, but it's following an international standard. We didn't want to create an additional layer of bureaucracy simply around Pillar 2. But it is right, and maybe the Treasurer can address this better than me, that we continue to ensure that we understand the risk of all of our tax revenue raising measures, and not just single out one particular element. And I think that work is largely undertaken by the FPP when it looks at its economic assumptions, and then by Treasury's income forecasting group when it looks about the forecast of particular revenue lines based on the FPP. So that was our real approach. Not that we shouldn't be thinking about the risk, because we should be. It was really a contention that we think that's already happening in our current processes, and Pillar 2 will feed into those current processes. But as I say, the Treasurer may wish to add something more to that.
Yeah, I think the recommendation identifies it's not just about tax here. You've got other matters relating to international competitiveness. We're undergoing a piece of work at the moment with colleagues in financial services to better articulate the risk, look to see what mitigations we have in place. So constantly on that corporate risk register, to be looking at this from a financial sustainability perspective, and there is an all-encompassing one relating to financial sustainability, which I have the pleasure of being the risk earner for. However, specifically calling out competitiveness arising from the changes arising from this particular tax, so we do develop separately.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Gorster, for joining us for that part of the meeting. Very quick question from me for the Minister. Can you just update us on the progress of the Chief Executive of Andium? recruitment.
Yes. Yeah, the closing date was last Friday, I think. Yeah, the closing deadline for applications was 17th of January. They have received a very good response. They have 37 applications. They will be meeting this week to look at a long list to start going through the panel. And the process, as you would expect, is being overseen by a designated appointments commissioner. So the appointments commissioner will be there to make sure that due process is followed. The interview panel, we have agreed, will consist of 3 of Andium's own non-executive directors, plus our own, the government's chief executive officer. And we're expecting interviews to take place, once we get to the shortlist process, final interviews to take place in early April.
Okay, thank you. And are you able to confirm that you've got local applicants on that list?
I believe, I don't have that written down, but I believe we do have some local applicants.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time. We're kind of less than 15 minutes. We've got a couple of sections left. If we don't get through them, I think we'll put them to you in writing. But the next section is about the state's investment strategies that Betty Andrews is going to ask you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The panel notes on the 20th of December, there was the publication of the State's Investment Strategies report. And I just want to know how the publication of this report differs to that compared to the previous one.
Okay, principally, there were 4 funds that had a deep dive during the year. They were the Health Insurance Fund, the Long-Term Care Fund, Social Security Reserve Fund, and the Currency Fund. The reviews undertaken on the Health Insurance Fund and Long-Term Care Fund did not give rise to changes in strategy, but the changes in strategy related to the Social Security Reserve Fund, and that's principally around the opportunity relating to the office investment. So that's within the alternative investment strategy within the property allocation. In respect of the currency fund, there were changes in asset allocation that related specifically to ensuring adequate liquidity within the fund. In addition to that, we have in the sections, it's quite a long document, changes related to responsible investment policy, aligning those policies with the state aim relating to net zero by 2050.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I note, obviously, the Council of Ministers agreed to acquire the new government building. It was £91 million, but also there are other investments that are made through the fund externally, away from Jersey, and I just wanted to know whether there is any big investments that have been made or that will be made in this forthcoming year.
Investments of?
So, yeah, we took an exception to the way that we normally heard about asset allocation with the office, given that we understood it would be potentially politically sensitive, and that we wanted to be able to explain what we were doing there. And because it was, whilst this ground has been trodden in the past in terms of some on-island infrastructure investments, particularly you look back in the past, that related to the broadband rollout by JT. There was, from time to time within the currency fund, some investments relating to that have now been repaid, relating to short-term investment to enable the development of housing developments in a couple of parishes. There is still in place, agreed, and I think it was actually one agreed within the budget of the time, stand to be corrected, relating to part investment in the sewage treatment works that's built into the budget of that department to repay and service. We have for a time thought about local infrastructure investments. We don't have anything on the cards right now in terms of delivering that, but we talked earlier in this hearing relating to how to fund increased capital investment. I know, like I said, at that point was nothing ever off the table at any point until we work further down. I'm not at this point saying that that's going to happen at all. But we are only invested, we're only looking for any local opportunities that don't damage the liquidity of the funds to any great extent, balancing that off, and also earn the investment returns we expect of those funds in terms of the targets.
Yeah.
So there's nothing significant in the pipeline. If it was politically sensitive, we'd follow the model that we did with the office.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Minister, in terms of when we're looking at some of the reserve funds that we have, are you pleased in terms of the current position where we are and some of the decisions that have already been taken in terms of the investment returns that will be generating a return into those funds?
I think the funds do very well. I mean, the thing I would emphasise is that they are professionally managed.
Yep.
And I was just thinking, we did a briefing for another panel a year or two ago. I don't know whether the panel would like a briefing on the investment, the funds and how they're invested. I mean, we can come to that. So we could certainly do that. We did it for previous, some of the Scrutiny panel members in 22 or 23. We did there was a briefing. They're kind of monitored regularly by the Treasury Advisory Panel. They have professional managers. They are rated against benchmark.
Yep.
And I can't remember because it was a funny measure, but I think they perform well against benchmark. So I don't have any concerns. I think we've recently signed a decision to remove two managers, I think, or cashed in took in some investments on Friday. So it is, they are actively managed with a view to, you have to start with what is the long-term objective of the fund. What's its liquidity requirements? What are our long-term aspirations and needs for it? And then the investment strategy then revolves around what the fund's long-term objectives are.
Yeah, obviously the panel notes, recently there's been it's news to us about the potential new health system that the Health Minister is looking to propose. And I just want to know whether he has discussed anything with you in regards to your remit as Treasury Minister, and whether there potentially could be any changes to some of the funds that you are responsible for administrating.
I would imagine that may take in. I mean, my view was that having the health insurance fund sitting in Social Security and having the relationship for primary care sitting in Social Security with everything else in health is odd and not efficient, not particularly efficient. And I think that the HIF, this is my personal view, I think there is a lot to be said for the HIF and all that relationship moving into health. But have you had more, you know more about that?
No, in terms of the Minister's responsibilities for that fund, they relate to the investment of the available funds that are there. Of course, in the wider sense, from a funding or financing of healthcare, we'd want to be looking to see what the funds would be used for if they were, if the means were changed. I don't understand that that's the basis of the proposal. It's more that you have some trade-offs. You have sometimes in history some perverse outcomes by having funding of health for one aspect with one minister and funding of health for other aspects with another minister. It doesn't always lead to the best system-wide outcomes.
In terms of that, was your involvement with health funding, are you considering new health health charges or taxes to fund healthcare?
I'm not. But health funding, you know, all those there's policy elements there that possibly cut across the two departments, but a health tax is not on my agenda at the moment.
Thank you.
Hold on. David, over to you.
Final one, the legislation programme, the basic question is, could you please provide us an update on the timeline regarding that legislation under your remit for lodging in 2025?
I think the main one really...
Well, it might be easier to do it in writing, maybe, I don't know.
The main one really will just be the work on the 2026 budget law, finance law, which will be, as normal, looking at income tax, operating allowances and duties, any other administrative amendments we want to make. We've already talked about work on vaping and alcohol duty. So there will be impacts with finance law and other things, I think really will come forward
Are you,
in due course.
are you going to stick to the same timetable as last year, or are you going to go back to the traditional timetable
For the
in terms of
budget.
lodging?
My preference would be to go back to the original timetable. I don't think it really gained a great deal. It wasn't, it had its own issues in terms of issuing a budget before certain key information was available, so.
I think somewhere in between, I know the chair initiated that when in a different seat around budget debate in December. So maybe look, I do think the debate in November worked
Yes.
better for a number of reasons, but the lodging before summer,
It's
from
problematic.
a professional perspective, means that you've not necessarily got as much up-to-date information at the point at which, given that we have a 12-week lodging period in any case, therefore running the numbers earlier, which means you haven't got as much taken into account in finalising those numbers as you would if you just stuck to a 12-week lodging period.
Yeah, sorry, apart from those items you already identified, is there anything else in the offing, and particularly, is anything being considered in relation to the rates law, which we've heard mentioned?
I don't think there's anything that advanced, and we're having discussions about rates, but I think I don't think it'll lead to any law changes this year. We were talking
The
about.
rates comes within your remit if there are any adjustments, but
It hasn't really come up on my agenda as yet. I mean, we've talked about payment of rates, the island-wide rate, but not beyond. We haven't got further. I haven't discussed with anybody changes to the rates law. That's not to say they may not be necessary or overdue. Are they going to come in this year? Probably not.
okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody else have any final questions from the panel? I think that we've got like 1 minute. No? Okay. Therefore, thank you very much.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Have you? You normally say.
Excuse me, what?
Do you have any thoughts or views on what your focus is going to be on in this year? Have you got anything? Do you have anything that you are planning on doing any kind of deep dive into, or any specific areas of focus?
As a panel, currently we will be focusing on the OECD Pillar 2 stuff. This is from a Treasury Minister perspective, but we have got other areas of focus that fall within the Chief Minister's purview.
Right, so just for Treasury, it's principle Pillar 2.
Yeah, and obviously keeping a close eye on the communication around independent taxation. Okay, thank you very much for attending our hearing today. I don't think we'll have many follow-up written questions. I think we've done it to the minute, and thank you to officers as well for attending.